Yo, what's good, everyone? Welcome to the Fantasy Football Prodigy podcast. My name is Tyler Anderson. I'm your host, and in this episode, we are going to be going over my Week 2 starts of the week at every position for Week 2 of the 2024 fantasy football season. But before we do that, make sure to like the episode and make sure to follow or subscribe wherever you are listening so that you can ensure that you stay up to date with new episodes and become a fantasy football prodigy. If you want video for the podcast and you're listening on somewhere else other than YouTube, head over there to the YouTube channel, Fantasy Football Prodigy, if you want to see my ugly face talking about fake football. Anyways, we're going to get into my starts of the week for week 2. Today is September 12th, 2024. This is episode number 14. We're kind of catching our groove now. We're double digits into this thing, and it's a lot of fun. The Thursday night game between the Bills and the Dolphins has already transpired, so we're not going to be talking about anyone in that game. But I will say, prayers up for Tua. He had that bad concussion in that game. I hope he makes the right decision for his life and his career. And then outside of that, I mean, a lot of offensive production for James Cook in that game. If you have him, you might want to kind of go with some people who have more guaranteed production for the rest of the week because you're off to a big lead. And if you're going against James Cook, you might want to shoot for the stars with some upside plays because whoever had James Cook is already likely going to be a heavy favorite for the rest of the week. Or if you had, a lot of those Miami Dolphins options like Tyreek Hill or Jaylen Waddle, one of those guys that you're relying on for big production, they didn't really have great games for fantasy. So in that case, you might also need to kind of shoot for the stars for some upside to make up that point differential. But anyways, we're going to get into my starts of the week now. I don't have I guess I typically don't have a set number of players that I want to talk about at each position, but in this episode, I have 3 of each skill position that I'm going to go over here: quarterback, running back, wide receiver, and tight end. And last week I didn't talk about any DSTs. I could touch on those a little bit as well at the end of the episode if that's something you guys are interested in. So I will get into that later, but we're going to start with the quarterback position. Start of the week at quarterback, Jared Goff of the Detroit Lions. It didn't work out in week 1. I really like that spot he was in at home against the Rams. I thought it was going to be a high-scoring game, a lot of passing. He finished as the quarterback 18 in fantasy, according to Fantasy Pros. Very disappointing, but I'm not going away from Jared Goff in week 2. He's taking on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. It's a 51-point over-under, and I expect a lot of passing on both sides of the field in this one. This game is once again at home in a dome where Jared Goff typically performs the best. Like I said, it didn't work out in week 1, but he has the weapons. He has the home environment, and he hopefully has a high-scoring passing game script in this one to have a good game. Jameson Williams appears to be a actual number 2 receiver, hopefully, if things continue from what we saw in week 1. He's got Amon-Ra St. Brown coming off of arguably the worst game he's had in years. And he still has Sam Laporta at tight end. He's got Gibbs and Montgomery out of the backfield. So he has the weapons. And I think that this is a great bounce back spot for Jared Goff to put up really good production. I have him as a low quarterback 1 for week 2. Next up, in the same game, another great quarterback start of the week is Baker Mayfield of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. 51-point over-under. Baker Mayfield lit it up in week 1 against a terrible Washington Commanders defense. The Detroit defense is not as great of a matchup just because there might not be a defense as bad as Washington in the entire NFL. But I think Detroit is going to focus on shutting down the running game for Tampa Bay. And I think Baker is going to have some opportunities to air it out again in what is hopefully a high-scoring back-and-forth game here. Between Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, and Rachaad White out of the backfield, he has the weapons to have a huge week in fantasy. Last week, Baker Mayfield, didn't he have 4? I believe he had 4 passing touchdowns. Let me just pull up his stat sheet here. Game log. So in week 1, Baker Mayfield was 24 of 30, had 289 yards and 4 passing touchdowns, no interceptions. He also added 21 rushing yards, was the quarterback 2 on the week, according to Fantasy Pros scoring. In week 2, I love Baker Mayfield as a low quarterback 1, high quarterback 2. Yeah, I think Baker Mayfield is in a great spot here, guys. My third and final quarterback start of the week, Jayden Daniels of the Washington Commanders. In week 1, he did not have a great game by NFL standards in his debut as a rookie. Showed what he could do on the ground, but the passing game really wasn't there. But he still finished as the quarterback 3 overall in week 1. Like I said, coming into the season, he doesn't need to be a good passer to be good for fantasy. He is an elite rusher, and that is an absolute cheat code in fantasy. Now he takes on the New York Giants, who just made Sam Darnold look like Peyton Manning. I don't think Washington as a team is good enough to blow anyone out, even the New York Giants. So there's a good chance that this game remains close enough to where Daniels will need to try to keep moving the ball throughout the game, both through the air and, more importantly, on the ground as he's running for chunk plays and getting in the end zone. He had 2 rushing touchdowns in week 1. I love Jayden Daniels in week 2 against the Giants as a low to mid quarterback 1. Those are my quarterback starts of the week. We are going to move on to the running back position. At running back, start of the week, Jordan Mason of the San Francisco 49ers. In week 1 against the Jets, Jordan Mason finished as the running back 3 overall in half PPR with no Christian McCaffrey. If McCaffrey is out again in week 2 against the Minnesota Vikings, Jordan Mason is a must start. If McCaffrey is out, he is going to get all the work. I believe he had 28 carries. Yeah, he had 28 carries in week 1. That is an insane workload. If there's no McCaffrey, he's going to see 20 plus opportunities in this game. And I know the Vikings just blew out the New York Giants, but they're arguably the worst offense in the league. The 49ers are arguably the best offense in the league. So it's going to be a true test for the Vikings defense. But regardless, I'm playing Jordan Mason as a must start if McCaffrey is out. Even if Christian McCaffrey does suit up and play, I think he's going to be somewhat limited. And the 49ers have Super Bowl aspirations. They're not going to overwork McCaffrey in a week 2 regular season game. So even if McCaffrey is out, I still think Jordan Mason is playable as a flex play. It'll kind of depend on how the workload gets divided. So monitor the news just to see what happens with that situation. They might not tip their hat ahead of the game. I would actually guess that we won't know what the split would look like if it is a split, if both are active, just because coaches love to be, secretive about all this. But yeah, I think he's playable in either situation, but obviously way more upside and a better play if McCaffrey is out. We're going to move on to my next running back start of the week here. Running back start of the week, J.K. Dobbins of the LA Chargers. He was the running back 4 in week 1 in half PPR. Gus Edwards, the Gus bus, is still there, but at least after week 1, he kind of looks more of the goal line bruiser type back, while Dobbins can actually rip off some chunk yardage plays. The Panthers, who the Chargers are taking on, just got absolutely destroyed by the New Orleans Saints on both sides of the field, and they just lost their Pro Bowl defensive tackle, Derek Brown, for the season. I expect the Chargers to win big in this game, so there should be plenty of rushing opportunities for this backfield throughout the game, up until they are likely running out the clock to ice the game in the fourth quarter. I love J.K. Dobbins this week as a mid running back 2, and if he's the one that gets in the end zone again this week, he might just win your week for you. Also, really good value on daily fantasy platforms. Or at least when I was looking at DraftKings, I really liked his price. Sorry, I keep coughing. My I am recovering from an illness, but I'm battling through it for you guys because I want you guys to become a fantasy football prodigy. If you're out there still listening, thank you, thank you, thank you. Please make sure to subscribe or follow wherever you are listening. I know you want more fantasy football content. I know you want to win your leagues. I know you want to be a fantasy football prodigy. But sometimes you just forget to follow or subscribe in the heat of just enjoying this high-octane fantasy football content. So take a second, unless you're driving, do it later. But if you're not driving, follow or subscribe wherever you're listening. If you are driving, quick, just pull over. Just go to the side of the road, stop at a gas station, stop at a Taco Bell, get a Baja Blast, and hit that sub, hit that follow button for me. All right. My third start of the week, Brian Robinson of the Washington Commanders. I love as a running back start of the week in week 2 of the 2024 fantasy football season. Brian Robinson of the Washington Commanders, he finished as the running back 12 in week 1. He had, let me pull up his box score here. I thought I had it pulled up, but apparently I'm just unprepared. I was just hyped up to get to remind you guys to subscribe. All right. Brian Robinson of the Washington Commanders in week 1 was the running back 12 in half PPR. He had 40 rushing yards, 1 rushing touchdown, and he also added on 49 receiving yards. And he was tackled at the 1-yard line twice. That set up some Jayden Daniels 1-yard rushing touchdowns. Brian Robinson is a good player, and I think he can be great for fantasy football in the right matchup. And I think in week 2, this is a great spot for Brian Robinson to have a big game. Against the Washington Commanders, against the Washington Commanders. He plays for the Washington Commanders. Against the New York Giants, I expect solid volume for Robinson in a game that should remain somewhat competitive. I think both of these teams are pretty bad, and I don't know if either one is going to blow each other out. So I expect good volume for Brian Robinson. And while Jayden Daniels can steal some rushing work and he can score on the ground when they get to the goal line, Robinson is still a good bet to put up solid rushing production in this one. I like Brian Robinson as a low running back 2 in week 2 against the Giants. All right, those are my running back starts of the week. We're going to move on to the wide receiver position. My first wide receiver start of the week is a duo. I love Mike Evans and Chris Godwin in week 2 against the Detroit Lions. Like I said earlier, it's a 51-point over-under. Both of these receivers looked great in week 1, and I love the potential for a shootout here against the Lions. Mike Evans is pretty much an auto play each and every week with how great he is and with his insane touchdown scoring ability. But after a rough 2023 season, Chris Godwin is really what I want to focus on here. I expected a bounce back season for Chris Godwin in 2024, and he got off to a great start in week 1. He exploited that matchup, and he finished, what was his fantasy finish in week 1? He finished very high. Chris Godwin was the wide receiver 11 overall in week 1. So, I mean, like I said, I expected him to have a bounce back year, and he's off to a great start. In week 1, in that wide receiver 11 overall performance, Chris Godwin had 8 targets, caught all of them for 83 yards, and also caught a receiving touchdown. And once again, I think this is a good spot for Chris Godwin. I made Chris Godwin a start of the week last week in week 1, and it worked out really well. Wide receiver 11 on the week, and I'm going right back to it. That was against Washington, admittedly, who looks to have a terrible defense, but I still like him in this spot against the Lions. He's a good play in terms of overall yardage and receptions, but if this turns into a shootout, if Baker puts up a handful of passing touchdowns, he had 4 in week 1. I don't know if he can do that again, but if he has multiple passing touchdowns and Godwin catches one of them, he might just go crazy in this one. I like Chris Godwin as a wide receiver 2 in what should be a high-scoring game. Next up, my next wide receiver start of the week is going to be Malik Nabers of the New York Giants. He had a solid week 1 debut. It wasn't, explosive, but He had 7 targets, caught 5 of them for 66 yards in his debut against the Vikings. And especially when you consider how bad Daniel Jones was in that game, to have 66 yards is pretty impressive with that type of quarterback play. But I love Malik Nabers in week 2 against the Washington Commanders. The Commanders just got absolutely destroyed by the Tampa Bay Buccaneers passing game. Malik Nabers is an extremely talented young player, and I think we see it on full display with a breakout performance this week. I've been ripping the Washington Commanders defense this whole podcast, and I'm going to do it again. I think even Daniel Jones can play well enough against this Washington defense to get Nabers the ball, and I think we see a big game out of the rookie, and we see his talent and potential on full display. I like Malik Nabers as a high wide receiver 2, and he might even be more of a low wide receiver 1 in terms of rankings now that we know that Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill did not have great games on Thursday Night Football. So Malik Nabers is a borderline must start unless you started super wide receiver heavy. Don't let a mediocre week 1 showing scare you away from Malik Nabers. There might be times this year where Daniel Jones just gets overwhelmed by defenses, but I don't think the Commanders' defense is overwhelming anybody. So Malik Nabers, get him in your lineup. I believe when I was looking at DraftKings, he seemed like a nice guy to target there too. In daily fantasy, his price wasn't super high. And I think as the season goes along, we're going to see that price tag just keep rising as he showcases his talent. Next up, my third and final wide receiver start of the week, DJ Moore of the Chicago Bears. I was nervous about his outlook heading into the season with a rookie quarterback and that crowded wide receiver room that they have after signing Keenan Allen in free agency and drafting Rome Odunze in the rookie draft. But I believe DJ Moore is an extremely talented wide receiver, and I actually like this spot for DJ Moore. Keenan Allen and Rome Odunze are both banged up and listed as questionable for this game against the Houston Texans. Even if one or both of them do play, like I said, they're both injured, they're both banged up, and the team might just have to rely on DJ Moore a little bit more in the passing game. If both of those guys are out, or if even one of them is out, that just even more so consolidates those targets towards DJ Moore, who would be the clear target leader for Caleb Williams. Speaking of Caleb, week 1 was definitely rough, but I think he is a much better player than what he showed in his first game ever, and I do believe that brighter days are ahead for Caleb Williams and this passing offense. This game is at Houston, and I think the Texans at home are going to put up points, even though the Bears have a solid defense. That Texans offense is lethal, and that's going to require the Bears to pass the ball a fair amount in this game. And if both offenses click, this could kind of be a sneaky back and forth, higher scoring affair than what a lot of people are thinking. But a few things would have to go right. The rookie quarterback would have to, play a lot better than week 1, and the Texans would have to overcome a pretty solid defense in the Bears. But, offense usually wins out in the league, although passing numbers are kind of down. Like in week 1, the passing numbers were really, really dreadful compared to years past. But regardless, DJ Moore is a solid wide receiver 2 play, and he always has big game potential just because he's an extremely talented player, and I'm very excited to see what DJ Moore can do in week 2. All right, we're going to move on to the tight end position. It's a bit ugly. We thought this would be the year where we had a handful, at least 4 or 5 of true number 1 every week starting tight ends. I still think that there is potential for that. But week 1 was definitely ugly. Isaiah Likely was the tight end 1 overall. He had 21.6 points in that season opener against the Chiefs. The tight end 2 was Foster Moreau with 12.3 points. This is half PPR. And then Kyle Pitts was the only other tight end that had double-digit scoring in half PPR. So, bad week. But we're moving forward. I'm going to give you my top 3 tight end starts of the week. My first tight end start of the week is Mark Andrews of the Baltimore Ravens. I'm making Mark Andrews a start of the week this week because I just want to talk about him. I just want to say, don't panic. Okay? Mark Andrews is a great start this week in week 2. Do not panic. His bad game in week 1 is being over amplified for a few reasons. One, it was week 1. People always overreact to week 1. And not only was it week 1, but it was game 1 of the NFL season, island game. Everyone was watching. And we saw Mark Andrews not perform for fantasy after an entire offseason of hyping him up and thinking that, he has tight end 1 overall potential. To compound that, his teammate, Isaiah Likely, not only did well, but he was the number 1 tight end on the week, and he was an inch away from adding another touchdown to that total. What I will say here is that the Kansas City defense absolutely sold out to stop Mark Andrews, and I don't think the Raiders can even attempt to employ that strategy. I just don't think they have what it takes to stop Mark Andrews. If you have Mark Andrews on your team, don't overreact to one bad week. Play him in week 2 against the Raiders. You cannot go away from him. I don't know how you would have a better option unless you just reached on 2 tight ends super early, which I wouldn't recommend doing. But if you did do that for some reason, maybe you have like someone you would play over him, like a Laporta or a Trey McBride. But you should be playing Mark Andrews in week 2. All right. We talked about Mark Andrews. I just wanted to discuss him because I've seen a lot of people questioning, like, oh, can I even play him? Yes, you can. We need to see a lot more of him being bad at football before we turn away from him, especially at a position where you almost certainly don't have a good pivot option. If you are in a situation, though, where you need kind of a streaming pivot option, someone to play if you're not stacked at the position, these next 2 guys are the guys for you. My next tight end start of the week is Colby Parkinson of the LA Rams. He was the lead. There's a bug. Get out of here. Get away from me. Maybe that's a bad sign for Parkinson. I don't know. But anyways, back to what I was saying. Colby Parkinson was the lead pass-catching tight end for the Rams in week 1. So he could be a solid streaming option moving forward while Tyler Higbee recovers from his injury. Also, Puka Nacua, superstar young wide receiver, is now on injured reserve. And even though Cooper Kupp might himself literally get 20 plus targets every game like he did in week 1, there is still an opportunity here for others to catch passes in Puka's absence. Demarcus Robinson and Tyler Johnson are some nice deep wide receiver plays, maybe some daily fantasy plays. But I think Colby Parkinson at the tight end position can exploit a bad Arizona Cardinals defense and have himself a solid game here. He's a good play if you lost David Njoku or if you are just streaming the position and looking for someone to start. I like Colby Parkinson as a low tight end 1, high tight end 2 in week 2 against the Arizona Cardinals. I forgot who they played there for a second. I'm not going to lie. All right. My third and final start of the week here at tight end. Pat Freiermuth of the Pittsburgh Steelers is a great streaming option at tight end in week 2 against the Denver Broncos. Vance Joseph defenses like to give up production to the tight end position. Additionally, the Pittsburgh Steelers really have no passing game weapons outside of George Pickens at wide receiver. You might need a touchdown out of Pat Freiermuth to really be happy with this performance, but he's an okay play if you need tight end help, and it honestly wouldn't shock me if he catches a touchdown here. He's a low tight end 1, high tight end 2 that you're hoping gets in the end zone in week 2 against the Broncos. All right. Those are my starts of the week at the quarterback, running back, wide receiver, and tight end positions. Really quick, we can kind of touch on some defense here as well if you are in a league that has team defenses. At the top, if you drafted and held on to the Jets and the Ravens defenses through those rough week 1 matchups, the Jets were taking on the 49ers, the Ravens were taking on the Chiefs. I know in one league I drafted the Jets, but I held on to 2 defenses in week 1. I played the Saints in week 1 against the Panthers, and that worked out. Because when you're playing defenses, it's all about the matchup. It is nice to have an elite defense, but it's so hard to predict who those defenses are going to be year to year. And even elite defenses against really great offenses can struggle to put up fantasy production and generate turnovers and get sacks. But in week 2, both the Jets and the Ravens are in really good spots. The Jets are on the road at the Tennessee Titans. The Titans offense did not look great in week 1. I think it'll look better moving forward. I think Will Levis, I don't know what to think about him, but he's flashed some upside at times, and he's not afraid to chuck it down the field. DeAndre Hopkins was very limited in week 1. As he gets healthier, that'll just help that offense. But in general, I think the Jets defense is really good, and I think they can exploit that Titans offense that isn't proven yet. And then the Baltimore Ravens are taking on the Raiders, the Gardner Minshew-led Raiders. They didn't look good in week 1 against the Chargers. That was another great spot, a great defense to play. I started the Chargers defense in my Dynasty League, and that worked out very well as well. So elite defense, not a great offense, at home in Baltimore. I love those two. Getting into some streaming options here. If the Pittsburgh Steelers are out there, they're taking on the Denver Broncos in Denver. I really liked the Seattle matchup in week 1 at home just because it's a rookie in his first game. I actually picked the Seahawks in my survivor pool just because that New England game made me nervous just with the wide receiver situation with no Higgins and Jamar Chase, dealing with that contract situation, maybe not being fully in game shape. But the Pittsburgh Steelers are taking on Bo Nix and the Denver Broncos. Bo Nix did not look good in week 1, and they're in a really good spot to kind of frustrate the rookie. I don't see a world where the Broncos score a lot of points, and the Steelers have a good defense where TJ Watt should be getting a ton of sacks, and they unless Nix plays extremely cautious, I think he's a good bet to have some turnovers in this game as well. Another great defense to start this week is the LA Chargers. They had a good week 1 against the Raiders, and now they take on the Carolina Panthers in Carolina. That offense looked dreadful. Bryce Young looked just terrible. Great. I don't think the Chargers are going to put up a lot of points, but it's also a spot where I think the Chargers can get some turnovers and get some sacks. Other than that, I mean, those are kind of like my favorite streaming options. If you have the 49ers, another kind of elite defense, I think you can start them against the Vikings, even though we had a good week 1. I say we like I'm on the team. I am a Vikings fan, but that was against the Giants. The 49ers are going to be a much tougher test for Sam Darnold, who historically has been a good guy to target defensively. You also got like a little further down. I'm not as excited about these options, but the Colts against Malik Willis. It's on the road in Green Bay, and they have enough weapons and Josh Jacobs in the backfield where they might just try to kind of keep the ball out of Malik Willis's hands and not leave him to make too many decisions. But I'd be surprised if the Packers put up a ton of points with no Jordan Love. You could, I don't know, if you're really desperate, Seahawks against New England in New England. I don't know if there's a ton of upside there because I think Jacoby Brissett at quarterback is going to manage the game well, but I also don't think the Patriots are going to light the world on fire in this one. Those are kind of the main ones. A deep one too, maybe Jacksonville at home against Cleveland, just because Deshaun Watson looked terrible in week 1, and we have yet to see him really look good at any point. So that could be a solid play. I'm sure Deshaun Watson will have at least 1, maybe 2 interceptions in that game. And if you want to get really nasty, and then we'll end with this, Washington Commanders, New York Giants, they both play each other. I think both teams' defenses will have some opportunities for some turnovers and sacks in this game. But both defenses are also bad, I think. And they both got lit up in week 1. So I would try to avoid those. But if you're in like a really deep league or you want to take a shot in like a daily lineup, those might be some guys you can play. So if you guys like kind of talking about the team defenses as well, I know a lot of leagues are moving away from team defenses, but if that's something you want me to touch on each week, I can do that. I could also have like a segment where, my top 3, but defenses are weird because, you have those like actually good defenses where you're probably playing them most weeks unless they're taking on a great offense. But then if you're like me, I kind of like to stream my defenses and just pick someone up each and every week off of waivers who has a good matchup. So anyways, you can comment down below if there's comments wherever you're listening. I know the YouTube does, so head over to the YouTube and subscribe. Fantasy Football Prodigy. Thank you guys for listening. I really greatly appreciate it if you made it this far in the episode. Thank you guys so much. I really appreciate it. Make sure to set your lineups, okay? There's a lot of injury situations. Monitor the news. Also, before I go, if you have a player that is playing earlier than other players in your lineup, make sure you put the later players in your flex spots if possible, okay? Let's just say, for example, you had McCaffrey in week 1 in your running back slot because, oh, he's my starting running back, okay? He's not my flex, okay? But he played on Monday Night Football. The Sunday games all happened. Monday came, and McCaffrey was ruled out. If McCaffrey was in your running back spot, that means that you can only replace him with a running back. Your only pivot option is another running back, and you don't have Breece Hall if you have McCaffrey, unless you're in an auction league or something crazy happened. Or you're in like a dynasty league where that can happen a little more likely. You don't want to start Breece Hall's backup, and there's a good chance that Jordan Mason might have already been picked up just because he's the clear handcuff to McCaffrey. So if he would have been in your flex, though, you could have pivoted to someone else, like a wide receiver like Jawan Jennings, Mike Williams, who ultimately barely played and was a decoy. If you had the foresight to start Alan Lazard at wide receiver, that would have been a huge performance. He had 2 touchdowns somehow. So that's my last little tidbit of the episode. I'm gonna let you guys go. Thank you so much for the support. I really appreciate it. Make sure to drop a like, follow, and sub, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace out.